what we have found is the candidates that demonstrate, our values and align with us culturally are ultimately the best fit for a specific position, whether they have the experience or not. And so that seems to be, the key emphasis is how are we measuring that? How are we evaluating that? And then ultimately, do they have the necessary skills to translate into that particular position? It's a question that I think, organizations had to face post-pandemic because they've had to look at talent different.
Welcome to the All-in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. I'm your host, Lydia, and with us today is Justin Fronberg of MGM Resorts International. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you, Lydia. It's an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about your background, Justin. I know you've been in the industry for years, but what's kept you in this space, particularly in the last 7 years or so in the show with MGM Resorts?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question. Before I go into that, I have to really go back to how I entered into the industry, because that's critical how, in terms of the time that I've spent at MGM. And so, I started within the industry as a front desk agent, believe it or not, and really at line level in the hotel operations and spent about 3 years in hotel operations. And so there was coming into that role and really navigating that environment, the one thing that had stuck with me is really a focus on the guest experience. There was so much of an emphasis and so much of a learning on the guest experience. How do we personalize that experience? How do we align their experience to our brand, and ultimately make sure that they're walking away satisfied and wanting to return? And so naturally, as I came into recruiting, there was an opportunity to go into recruiting, not necessarily your normal recruiting role, but it was a role that was really focused around the candidate experience. And so what they were looking for is, hey, you've done this with our guests. How can we translate that experience into our own candidates and our own employees? And so I found that fascinating in many different ways, because it was an opportunity to really help differentiate, ourselves amongst the market. Our candidates, instead of going through a traditional interview process, what we're trying to do is really immerse them into an experience in order for them to effectively make a decision to be hired by us, right? And so that has been at the forefront of everything I've done in terms of my career. And so as I've looked at MGM, and had the opportunity to come into this company about 7 years ago, that was a huge main focus for me, is what are they doing from a candidate experience and a people perspective? What's amazing about this company is it truly is a differentiated, it's in a differentiated part of the industry. And I think what I mean by that is that, they're very progressive. And so when you think about this organization, and looking at their diversity and inclusion program, they were one of the first in the industry to create a formalized program around that. When you look at talent and the changing landscape that we've gone over just in the last 3 years, pandemic, let alone 7. I mean, from an organization as large as this, it's extremely agile and adaptable. And so one thing that was important for me as I entered into this organization was, does this organization share my values? And does, because that was critical to me in order for me to look at my career and way that was going to be moving forward. Do they believe in the same things that I do? And the answer was yes. And so naturally, coming into the organization, I was the executive recruiter for that supported all executive level roles for domestic and international hiring. Really that has progressed, over the years to the position that I'm in, where I've overseen, the Las Vegas properties, executive recruiting, technology, sourcing, as well as our corporate hiring as well. And so it's a large span of responsibility, but it is truly such a satisfying opportunity, because there's so much going on in all of those various spaces. and we continue to change and we continue to adapt organizationally. So it brings a new adventure every single day coming in. And so that's why, as I look at the last 7 years, it's definitely been exciting and been thrilling.
That first experience that you had, those 3 years focusing on the guest experience and bringing that perspective into your role, and now you're executive director leading the transformation, I would imagine, inside the talent acquisition space. How do you translate that, or how do you inspire your team to have that sort of perspective towards talent acquisition as well?
Yeah, so I think in terms of my role is really focused around people leadership at this point, right? It's really making sure that they're engaged. We've gone. You had mentioned that through our transformation, right? And so at post-pandemic, like most companies, we were faced with looking at how are we hiring, what does that look like? Companies were looking at coming back online as quickly as possible. It wasn't this slow, progressive way of coming back online. It was, we're coming back online and we're coming back fast. And what was great about our organization and our industry was that, a lot of people were, into their homes and they weren't able to go anywhere. So the first thing that when they were able to go somewhere, they wanted to come to Vegas. And so we really needed to look at our hiring practices. We needed to look at our hiring philosophy because we had a lot of volume and ultimately we were in the same space as a lot of other companies as well. And so we undertook, coming into this role, we undertook a transformation, and we knew this was going to be a 3 to 4 year transformation. One, it was to really look at our hiring philosophy, our hiring processes, looking at our technology, and looking really at our talent acquisition operational model. How are we positioning ourselves previously versus now? And then what do we want to look at in terms of the future? And so when you talk about engagement, right, change, constant change and rapid change, such as what we've gone through for the last 3 years, it can be difficult. And so I think as a leader, it's having the ability to communicate and provide clarity to their team around what that future looks like and what that strategy looks like, so they can understand what we're trying to accomplish, and they feel also part of that strategy. But in addition, it's really making sure that you're empathetic to them in terms of their needs, because they're the ones actually doing the work, and really partnering with the managers, really partnering with these leaders to hire their talent. They're implementing and executing on some of these practices or processes that we have in place, and really making sure that we're getting their feedback on a consistent basis, and we're recognizing them through highlights of success. And that's what we found has been tremendously successful, in terms of a very large transformation across TA.
And yeah, so there is the transformation element, and there's also that broad scope that you mentioned earlier, right? So looking into practices and technologies that are put in place to hire fast and really maintain the differentiation inside the industry itself. So what are some key areas that you've prioritized at the moment, given all these different aspects that you have to look into?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, really is the people are first, right? So leading from a people perspective, are we aligning ourselves to, the TA model by which we have implemented? But and really helping support and develop that team that's in place to make sure that they're executing on that, right? And that level of transformation. And then, in terms of the experience, right? Going back to that is, from a transformation perspective, it's also around how do we elevate the hiring manager and the candidate experience. And so that can be in terms of, feedback for candidates in a very quick manner, right? And so we know nowadays that for candidates, when you're presenting an offer, they usually have 3 to 4 in hand by the time you actually get an offer. So it's important and critical for organizations and leaders to make sure that they're communicating with those candidates quickly. And we're arriving to that decision, whether that is to move forward or not move forward, right? And so we want to make sure that we're providing that level of expectation and transparency to that candidate. And that stems in terms of, how are they engaging our brand within our career site? How are they looking at our branding and our employee value proposition as our recruiters are sourcing, and what is out there in the market? From the first touch point to the last, what does that engagement look like? And so, we focused on all of those efforts across that scope and that end-to-end process in order to improve it holistically. I'm not going to sit here and say everything is fixed, but we have, in the last 2 years, we have dramatically increased that level of experience surrounding the candidate, and as well as to the hiring manager as well, with where our recruiters are providing support to them.
So when it comes to hiring, Justin, how do you balance seeking out candidates with experience versus those with potential skills that can translate to other roles?
Yeah. So it's been an intriguing question, and something that has been discussed across the industry at length, and I think that it will continue to evolve. As organizations continue to evolve and as they're looking at quality candidates, right? When we think about relative experience, we think about, do candidates have the necessary skills to be able to do this job, or can they translate what they currently have done, or what they currently are doing, what they have done, into what we're looking for, what that position entails. And so, it's what we have found is that answer is yes. We have seen that, quality candidates, in order to measure quality, what does that mean? It can mean a variety of different ways, or different things. And what we have found is the candidates that demonstrate, our values and align with us culturally are ultimately the best fit for a specific position, whether they have the experience or not. And so that seems to be, the key emphasis is, how are we measuring that? How are we evaluating that? And then ultimately, do they have the necessary skills to translate into that particular position? It's a question that I think, organizations have had to face post-pandemic, because they've had to look at talent differently, right? Previously, prior to the pandemic, you'd align yourself, and you have a position, you'd align somebody with that position with their experience. But nowadays, really, as you're looking to get creative, there's been so much constant change. People have changed careers and into different industries. They've had to make life choices. And so really making sure that, all right, if they're changing a career, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They've actually done what we're kind of looking for, just in a different way. And that can actually translate into this particular role. And so I think that there's value on both ends, but we have found a tremendous amount of success around relevant experience.
Yeah, experience aligned with values, ultimately.
Yes, absolutely.
And as you mentioned, coming out of the pandemic and all these differences that we've seen in people's life choices, as you mentioned, and also the trend to a more distributed workforce, or those working remotely or hybrid, how have candidate expectations evolved? And with that, has the approach towards hiring, you've answered this, I think, but has the approach towards hiring changed within this industry, you think?
Yeah. It's again, a great question. I think, the answer is yes. The candidate's expectations have evolved, and evolved in a very significant way, right? All in all, I think candidates, and employees, they're looking for work-life balance. And so organizations have had to face this question: is how can we provide that work-life balance, right? And that's going to be different amongst a multitude of organizations. But I think also is that, we've had to focus in terms of, how are we really making sure that the candidate experience is at the emphasis and the center of everything that we do, right? So all your processes, everything you do systemically and from a technology standpoint, should center around the candidate experience. And so, and your brand, your employer brand, right? How can they picture themselves essentially in the role, as you're telling that story, or as the recruiter, or how are you branding that? And so really making sure that, again, you're elevating that experience, but you're also streamlining those processes as well, right? We've found that a lot of candidates are, have multiple opportunities that in the front of them. And so we want to make sure that, we're the first one that they think of. And so are we getting back to them quickly?
Mm.
Are we making sure we're providing them the right information? A huge focus for candidate expectations is, again, looking at work-life balance, but also looking at lifestyle. So benefits is a huge key focus for organizations, and that has been able to really kind of progress the conversation forward in terms of how do we innovate and how do we become more progressive from a benefits perspective, because ultimately we know that that's going to be a competitive factor, not necessarily just compensation, but more from a benefits standpoint, right?
Yeah, the holistic package and really just looking into them staying on. And that, I would imagine, also contributes to the retention rate for employees.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when they believe in the company and that ultimately they provide the needs of what those employees are looking for, right? You also, and you have great leaders, and you have leaders that motivate their employees, that ultimately encourage them, develop them, and grow them. You're going to find that there is going to be more retention. There was such a thing called the Great Resignation, and a product of that, what we have found was that, the leaders weren't necessarily providing that great candidate experience all the way through onboarding, right? So they'd hire them and they communicate with them, they come on board, and then, reality kind of set in, and ultimately, they're now part of the team and they're off and running. But really what you have to do is you have to care for that employee for the first at least 90 days. And make sure that you're continuously selling the company and the benefits, and making sure you're addressing their needs on an individual basis, and that's helped contribute to the retention factor as well.
Yeah, and we were talking pre-show about how the candidate experience and the guest experience isn't all that different.
No, yeah, it's truly aligned in many ways. And what's great about being in hospitality is that we specialize in this space. And so we can simply carry that over of what we do from the guest standpoint to the employee and or candidate side as well. And so we've taken a lot of great learnings and aligned ourselves operationally from a recruitment perspective to what we've done in operations, because it is there's a lot of centricity there.
Now, travel and tourism is obviously coming back. We've seen it return in the past 2 years at least. So, how do you anticipate the demand for talent evolving in this industry? Is there higher, stiffer competition that you're going to be looking at in the next 2 or 3 years at least?
Yeah, again, a great question. And candidates have options nowadays, and they continuously have options. I know, especially in the U.S. Unemployment is low, but there is a continuous sought out jobs, and companies are continuously hiring, and we know that they have these options, and it's going to be ultimately competitive, and so we're really focused organizationally to be an employer of choice, and again, going back to offering some of the top benefits and what's going to differentiate us from that perspective. One of the differentiators I think that we do, and do well, is that we really solicit feedback, not only from our hiring managers, but also our employees, right? What is their experience? What are their needs are? And we continuously do that to ensure that, we're able to adapt, right? A lot of our innovation, one would think, in organizations, especially large organizations, a lot of the innovation and the decisions are made at the top. But that can't be can't be but the contrary, to our organizations. We really look at soliciting that feedback across the organization, even at the at a line level position on, an operational position, a beginning level management role, and understanding what are the pain points that they're going through, in order for us to be able to enhance that experience for them, right? Get them the right resources that they're actually needing. And so, we know that's a differentiator. And why is that a differentiator? Because they talk to other people within their networks, right? And so as we look at candidates in the external market, when they come to work for an employee, 9 times out of 10, they probably know somebody that actually works for our organization. And so when they are able to get that feedback and understanding like my voice matters, that's powerful. And that's something that, a lot of people would want to be a part of.
Now, technology is obviously transforming so many aspects of business today in terms of operations, in terms of data, analytics, and how decisions are made. So how do you envision technology shaping the future of TA, especially in the hospitality industry?
Yeah. So, it's, in terms of, we are really focusing on, the conversation around technology, right? Technology seems to be at the forefront of all of the conversations that I've been a part of, not only within the industry, but also outside of the industry, and really it's all about how does technology add value to our guests and or candidates, right? So what does that mean in terms of experience, in terms of process and efficiency? Again, technology is not to eliminate jobs. It's really to make sure that we're bringing it in a well thought out manner that ultimately allows us to do more. And so in terms of our approach to technology, how are we looking at that in a way that, one, is responsible, but ultimately it is elevating and supporting the overall strategic strategy. I think a lot of companies, what they do is they look at the shiny new toy that's out there and they want to bring it in. And then now you have a variety of different technologies that don't necessarily talk with one another. And so it's important for an organization, especially in recruiting, to start with the strategy. What are we trying to accomplish? And that needs to be at the forefront in the direction, right? And then technology is coming behind it to help support that experience and or that process. And so I think for recruiting, it's going to be around how do we source quality talent and where are we finding this talent? It's really how are we looking at technology in a way that is meaningful and engaging to candidates? And then how are we looking at technology in a way that helps our recruiters be more efficient in their approach and their process so they can focus on sourcing, communicating with the business and providing expectations and guiding the leaders in a way that's meaningful. And so that's kind of how I see that being shaped. But ultimately, technology at the end of the day should be supporting the overall strategy, not leading it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned pre-show, as we were talking about moving the mindset or the thinking around talent acquisition from administrative to strategic, has technology played a role in this, and how far have you gotten with that transformation?
Yeah, so it's really as it relates to technology and our recruiters, right? It's critical as a leader for me to make sure I'm providing the resources to them, right? And so there are those resources available that allow them to do their job effectively. And so they have to see the value add in the technology that they're utilizing, right? Like if they don't see that, they're never going to adopt it. And ultimately, that if they're not going to adopt it, now you're stuck with paying for a technology for a period of time because you contracted with that company, right? And so it's really making sure that, advising them, and teaching them and developing them around that piece of technology, how that aligns to their specific process and their day-to-day, right? And how they can utilize this in order to be effective or even more effective than what they are doing now, right? They have to see that level of value. So it takes a much a larger intentional effort from leaders to really make sure that their recruiters are utilizing it in a well thought out and meaningful way in order to be effective. And that's ultimately to get the manager's candidate. So whether that is sourcing tools, whether that is a CRM, whether that happens to be, brand marketing tools or any, and I can go on, right? It's making sure that it's succinct within that end-to-end process and making sure that they understand how to utilize that product.
Well, Justin, I've been meaning to ask about the show. How do you go about talking about that story, or how do you present that, or how do you really turn that into something that a candidate will be able to envision themselves in?
Yeah. So it's a great question. We've done a large amount of work around our employee value proposition, and so there was a lot of work around what that looks like, and how can we articulate that from a recruitment perspective or a recruitment marketing standpoint. And so really translating that exposure to, or that branding in the marketplace, whether it happens to be with our recruiters for roles that they're working on, and or holistically from our career site all the way through to the end of the recruitment process, right? And so we've looked at that in many different facets, and one of the things that I think that has been truly valuable is telling the stories of our current employees in the market, right? And so if I'm a security officer, or I want to be a security officer, and it's not your normal security officer position that you might find at a corporate space, but more so now it's a security officer that's ensuring the safety of our guests, ensuring the safety of our employees, but it's also to make sure that we're providing still an experience to our guests as well, right? And making sure that they're providing that experience in a safe environment. And so how do you tell that story? Well, the best way to tell it is from our current employees. And so we've been able to showcase that through employer branding and marketing efforts that are really kind of aligned across all of our messaging, whether that happens to be through communications, via LinkedIn and or our job postings, or even just really on our career site as well.
So, Justin, you've had a wealth of experience in this industry and also within the space, and you've had a great story of moving or shifting your experience from those initial 3 years into the talent acquisition space. So what advice would you give someone who's starting out in the people space today?
Yeah, I know this might sound, simple, but to continue to focus on the people, right? And so at the end of the day, as a recruiter, or as an HR professional or a people professional, your job is to service, and lead people, and and guide them in appropriate ways. And so never lose, that focus. I think it's very easy from a day-to-day perspective to do. It sounds, again, very simple, and simple advice, but it's really making sure that you're providing, and you're providing that emphasis on that, care, right? You have to, as a people leader, you have to care for employees, right? You have to care for people and what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. And so it's really making sure that they're at the forefront of everything that you do, and never forgetting that.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for your time and your generous insights. I'm sure whoever's listening in might want to pick up a conversation with you. So where can they connect with you?
Yes, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Available on that, and I know that the link will be posted on this chat. And definitely happy to connect. And if there's any questions beyond this, or just want to have a conversation, happy to connect with them. And looking forward.
Thanks again, Justin. We have been in conversation with Justin Fronberg of MGM Resorts International. Thank you for joining us, and remember to subscribe. Stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruitment.